Hi guys, my name is Simon Grant and today we're going to talk about drum tuning. So today, for the benefit of today's lesson, we're going to tune this drum, the HTS 800. So what you'll need for tuning the drum is a single drumstick, or you can use two if you need, and a drum key depending on what drum you're using. This is a Premier key which will work on Premier snares, Pearl and axial snare drums. So before I start tuning the drum, I'll always take the bottom snare down. So you hear, if I tap the drum, that there's very little snare response. If I bring it back up, you hear the snare there. So I'll bring it down until it's off. You'll hear that there. That's the snare off. So I like to start on the bottom of the drum. So let's flip it over and look at the bottom of the drum. So here we have the bottom of the snare drum. So we've got the bottom skin, bottom snare and the height and tension adjusters. So whenever I set the bottom snare, I always loosen off the height adjusters on each corner. So I've loosened them off, and you'll hear when I tap all four corners of the snare that the snare actually isn't touching the drum. When you hit it, you'll still get a response, alright, because it's going to be hitting in the middle of the drum, or the snare will hit in the middle. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to apply a bit of tension to this bottom head. So we're in lockdown 2020, or we just came out of lockdown, and I'm going to apply some tension to this bottom head because it's been sitting for ages, not doing anything. So to do that, use a drum key, and we're going to go diagonally. So with the bottom skin, it's always just minor tweaks. So you see how I just done a small turn there, and I always put my finger there, and that tells me that's where I started, and I'm going diagonally opposite all the way through the drum, doing that tiny little turns, no more than that, tiny, tiny. And whenever I've done that, I always give the skin a wee feel to see how tight it is, and then I'll give it a little tap. Okay, and I'm ignoring snare sound, and I'm just listening to the sound I'm getting, or the pitch of that bottom skin. And I'll have another good listen again, because what I'm going to do is take it up another little turn. This time I'm going to use two drum keys. So I'm going to put one here and one here, and I'm going to turn one at a time. So that one, then that one, and then I'm just going to move up and round. So I'm still doing diagonally. I'm just using two keys at once, doing the same minor little twists of tension there. And if your bottom skin is fairly tight, then you won't need to do this. Alright, you won't need to apply too much tension to the bottom skin. You'll hear that that's got even brighter stuff. And another way you can check, because this is a fairly new bottom head, is if you feel here, this little bit here, that for this bottom rim and the bottom skin meet, you want there to be a slight height differential from the rim to the skin. So you want the rim to be lower than the skin. Okay, just so you can make sure the snare is going to touch the skin. I've got that with this drum now, and because I've took it up two wee turns, I'm not going to take it up any more than that. That would be too much for me. So what I'll do now is adjust the height of each corner of the snare. And this is a wee bit wonky. Alright, the carry bar is a little bit wonky. So I would need to loosen these bolts and just even that up. But that doesn't affect the sound of the drum. This is just the wee laddie who had this drum has let it get a wee bit wonky. So when I'm doing this, I'll go to each corner and I'm going to tighten them up. And I'll do it here so you can see it. I'll do this corner first. And you'll hear as I'm tightening it, the sound's going to change, because that's me bringing the snare closer to the skin. and I'm just tapping about maybe an inch away from the edge of the drum skin. Hear there how it's starting to change? So that's it. Really tight, it's really snug against the skin. For me that's too tight, I don't like it when it's too tight. I'd have it there, so it's just touching, just touching. So when you're striking the drum, you're going to get a snare response from that corner there. And it's a nice bright snare response that I'm getting there, I like that. And then I'll do the exact same on the other corner. And I'll do it with this hand because it's so much easier. And you'll hear it just changing again. And you're going to try as much as you can to get these two corners to match each other. Okay? And then once I've done that, I'm going to do the exact same on the other side. And I'll move the drum to here so you can see it on this side. Again, I'm going to tighten that bottom snare. Tapping just 1 inch away from the skin until it touches the skin. And I'll do this side as well. And there we are. So all 4 corners are now touching the skin. Once I've done that, I tend to go around them again. Alright, because you won't get a true snare sound from that side, bringing them down, if this side's way up in the sky. So once they're both down, I'll go back to each 4 corners and just adjust them again. There we are. So that's all 4 corners on. Another thing I like to do, and these drums are fine, alright, but I'll show you an example of when a drum is not fine. The bottom snare is uneven. So I'm going to loosen this and tighten this, but I'm not going to do it too much because I don't want to wreck the drum. So let's see if you can spot what's wrong with this. Quite hard to see in the picture. I'll give you a clue. This side of the snare is much tighter than this side. Let's have a look again. So see that one there? It's got that much of a space from the bottom rim. This one has got very little space between the snare and the bottom rim, lefty righty ways. So look out how close that one is. Look at the space, big space there. So the way I go around it to make sure they're all in the middle is with the Premier one. I'll put my finger there, and that's like a whole finger's width. Finger there, it's like 3/4 of a finger's width. So I need to loosen this side and tighten this side. And then I'm just bringing it right into the middle. And again, you can use your finger. So I'm looking there, that's just under a finger's width. Just under a finger's width. So that's perfect. So when I move the snare with my fingers, I'm getting the snare right in the middle of the bottom skin. And because I haven't moved these about, I'm just going to do a quick check of these 4 corners again. Yep, I'm okay with that. They sound fine to me. And we've applied tension to the bottom head, so it's a little bit brighter. And what I'll do now is I'm going to loosen these off. So that's me loosening the snare off. So it's ridiculously loose. And then I'm tightening it up. And I'm tightening it up. And what you'll notice, the tighter I go, the brighter it's going to sound. So if I go even more, it's getting brighter, even more, even brighter, okay? So the way I like to remember that or explain to folks, it's like you've got an elastic band. If it's really loose and you ping it, it's going to go boom, tighter, boom, tighter, ding. The tighter it is, the higher the pitch will be. But the higher the pitch is, the less depth of sound you're going to have. So it's really, really tight and it goes bing, bing, bing. It lasts like a millisecond and it's done. Whereas if it's really loose, it's like dong, and it lasts ages. So you're trying to find that happy medium. So the tighter it is, the brighter it's going to be, but you're going to get very little depth of sound. So you're trying to find a happy medium. So again, I'm getting loads sound in, but I don't want as much as that. So I'm going to push it until it's nice and bright. I would be there. I've just stumbled upon it. I would probably be there. Any looser, even just a touch looser, see how it's got quite dull? Back to where I was, a wee touch more. Yeah, I'd be about there. And you could go even further, so you're going minor wee tweaks. So that's making it even sharper. Even sharper, okay? It depends what sort of sound you're after. For me, I like as bright as I can with as much snare as I can get. So you're going to have to sit and try and get as much snare as you can, whilst it's still nice and bright. Alright, and then it's just trial and error. You're just sitting, going as much as you can. A lot of folk, when they're doing the bottom skins or bottom snares, they'll have it really loose, like that, and then they'll just keep moving until it takes the string. So that's it there. That's it taking the strain. It's no longer mega loose. I'm going to flip the drum over and give it a wee hit. Quite hard to tell because it's indoors. You can hear, for me, it's quite a dull sort of sound, but you're still getting that snare sound, and you'll have heard how it sounded a bit dull there. Not massively dull though. I would take it up just a touch from there. That would be me there. So I'm still getting snare response, and I'm still getting that bright sound. Okay, now moving on to the top of the drum. So if it's a reasonably new head, or you're wanting to apply tension to the drum, you can do what we done earlier on the bottom, except do it on the top. So you'll see all the tension bolts are evenly spaced. If you want to apply a bit of tension to the drum, you would do the same, just tiny little turns, and you're going diagonally round the whole drum. So here we are, and again I'm going to use the two drum keys. So I'll start here and here, and I'm going to go little turn, little turn, little turn, little turn. And for me, using two drum keys is the easiest way to ensure that I'm doing an even turn on each bolt. So I'm doing a little bit, little bit, little bit. I've applied a bit of tension to the drum. I've done that because I want to make it a bit brighter. And you can hear that the top snare actually isn't on the drum, because at the very start we took the top snare down. So now we're going to bring the top snare up. So using the top snare height adjuster, I'm just going to twist it, and I'm going to see if you can hear this. You hear that? That little shh. I'll do it again. I'll take it right off. Alright, so that's it right off. Have a listen, see if you can hear this. Hear that? That's the sound of the snare just about making contact with the top skin. And you'll hear there, I'm getting a crazy amount of snare response. Reason for that, and I'll do it again, hear that big long rattle, is because the snare is very close to the skin, but it's not quite touching yet, so it's got no way of stopping the vibrations. So all I would do is keep bringing it up, and you'll hear that those vibrations are getting less and less, to the point where there's none at all. Okay, and that's where we are now. So once the top snare is on the drum, this is where it becomes, it's not trial and error, but it's your discretion. Okay, you can finely tune how you would like the drum to sound. A lot of people I know will just crank it up and crank it up until the top snare is poking right through the drum. And I don't know if you can see that. I'll maybe zoom in, maybe see it. It's cranked as high as it'll go. Okay, for me, I don't like that where it's absolutely ripped through the skin. I like it down just a touch further because I like the thought of having the snare breathing. If I take the drum off and give it a tap, it's not god awful, but it's not great. Okay, so I tend not to do that. I would have it down a touch. If I bring it down just a touch and then bring it up that little bit. Oh, I'd have it about there, maybe a wee touch higher actually. Yeah, I'd have it about there. Okay, so you're still getting plenty of snare response and you're still getting that nice bright snare sound. So, you put your snare height up. You would tend to do the height and the snare, I tend to do them at the same time. So if you think back to the bottom snare, we're talking about if the snare was loose, you're going to get a bong sound. If it's really tight, you're just going to get bing, and that's it. You get that idea when I tighten the top snare. So if I tighten it right up, hear how all forms of snare response are rapidly disappearing. Okay, that's the snare far too tight, and it's referred to as a choked sound. Okay, avoid that at all costs. It's a honking sound. So I'm going to loosen that back off again to where we were for a wee bit there. Yeah, so you're wanting to bring the snare up to the skin, okay, to try and get as much response as you can. Bring it too close to the skin and you're not going to get as much response as you want because it's going to be squashed against that drum skin. So you're not going to get as much response as you want. A lot of folk I've seen will crank it as high as they can and make the snare as loose as they can. That works, but for me it's a bit tricky because the top snare might fall off. Plus it's not the most reliable on it because you're just relying on it being as high as you can. What if it slips off a little bit, and then what if it falls off the top mechanism due to that? So for me, I'm not a big fan of that sort of sound. So if you're bringing it up, a general rule of thumb I would say is as you're bringing it up higher and higher, loosen it off just a touch. So when you're going high, you're loosening it off just a little bit, and then once you've reached the height that you like, say you've been loosening it off, always give it that tiny little turn back. Alright, that's me just tightened it up just a touch. Okay, because if you set that snare mechanism into loosening motion, it's just going to keep loosening off eventually through time. That little turn, even with the height, if I'm dropping the height and I want to keep it there, I need to give it just that tiny little bit of tight. Alright, and that's theoretically taking up the slack. So you have to do that when you're loosening and tightening snares, top and height and tension. And ideally, you would have the drum either on somebody else and you're doing this, you're getting them to tap it on it, because if you're doing this, you can hear the sound changing. But for me, I'm wanting to get the tension as well. I'm wanting to do them both at the same time. And you don't have to. I mean, when you're first starting out, you might just do one at a time. You might say, right, I'm bringing it up to where I feel the pitch is good and I'm getting a decent response, which might be there. And then you might say, right, I'm going to do this now. I want to get rid of that little rattle, if that's your cup of tea. Alright, that's me got rid of the rattle, but the drum's choked. So you go back. Yeah, so that's the rattle gone. And for me, that's the drum tuned. Well, the drum's good to go. I mean, it's not a fully false representation, but it's trickier doing it when it's on the table. Alright, because the sound's battering off that bottom, the bottom of the table. But you would ideally do it outside, and you'll be able to tell straight away if you'll actually hear it better outside. So from here, yeah, I can hear the top snare responding well, and I can hear the bottom snare responding well. So that concludes our lesson on drum tuning. For me, the big thing you can do is obviously have an understanding of what's spoke about there in terms of snare mechanisms, the top head, bottom head, how to set them, excuse me, and the like. But a lot of it's trial and error. So if you know those things and you have an understanding of how sound is produced from the drum, then you should be able to use all those points plus a degree of common sense to be able to get to the sound you're after. And as always, I'll put a few slides up after this video. There's also handouts. I've made handouts on how to tune the drum, and if anyone's got any other questions about it, give me a shout.